About 8 minutes to go of this match. The Lions trailing 16 points to 19. Are they about to lose their long unbeaten record? The Lions 3 points adrift, needing to keep their discipline now. The lineouts just outside their 22.
Some great players have never been Lions. Those that have, they know what it's like. Being a Lion, to me, is just being the top.
Acceleration, support from Gareth Williams onto O'Driscoll. O'Driscoll held by David Smith, taken on by Quinnell. 10 metres outside the invitation 15-22. Patterson away. Richards, long feed out to Slemon. Slemon trying to cut back inside, tackled by David Smith.
And for all of the tests in the future, I will be jealous because I know they'll experience the same joys and happiness that I did on my trips.
Slipped as Shields came in with the tackle. Quinnell keeping the support going. Rennick out to Elgin Rees. Back inside the defence, over the 22.
When you pull on that red shirt for the very first time, you realise this jersey is special because of all the history and tradition and the great players that have worn it before.
Clive Woodward goes for the outside run to feed Slemon, but is well tackled there by Nicky Davids from the left. Slemon to Gareth Williams in support. And Conkey fly hacks downfield to the halfway. There's Richards, tries to find Alan Phillips.
If you go and ask any guy who's been in the Lions tour, he'd say that was different, that was special.
Tremendous controlled play by the Lions here. That's Phillips taking it on the pirouette. Support on the outside from Patterson to Elgin Rees once more. Still
the feeling to be selected for the Lions is quite unique, and when people are dull enough to talk about, oh, stop the Lions, no need for it, they must be mad.
Bruce Hay up in the line with Slemon. Bruce Hay still, Slemon inside. It's going to be a score. Slemon's through. That's out of this world. You'll never surely see a greater combined effort than that. Rugby in its finest expression.
I think I'd have given up everything to be in a Lion. A Lions tour, more than anything else in rugby, pulls the best out of people, and that I love.
In many ways, the British Lions have more than a century of tradition behind them. The first touring party to the Southern Hemisphere left in 1888 to play 54 matches in 9 months, and it was an eventful trip. Their captain R.L. Seddon drowned during the Australian leg, and his New Zealand counterpart Joe Warbrick also died, engulfed in the lava of an erupting volcano, an unpromising start. The name Lions wasn't used until 1924, though, on a trip to South Africa. But it was in 1971 that their position in the Sporting Hall of Fame was established once and for all.
Somebody said, this Lions team just ain't got it, they're going to get stuffed.
I thought I was never going to play in a winning Lions team.
Absolutely no chance against the All Blacks. And I thought, that's strange, it must be dull to make a statement like that.
And it gets frustrating, you get fed up being kicked around.
It was a side that became so famous, surnames were superfluous. Willie John, Gareth, Barry, JPR, all led by a tactical mastermind called Carwyn, who revolutionised the art of coaching.
Carwyn was really the first full-time, if you like, coach of a side, and he had a great approach with the players, and I think he made a huge contribution to the success of the tour. I think everybody feels when you get together like that, and when you've got such a huge amount of talent that the 71 side had, that you were going to do well. And I think that if there was any doubts after the game against Wellington, I think everybody then knew the series was up for grabs.
Williams, Bevan. Marvellous try. Here's Gibson. This is easy. Gibson.
One of the great journalists, J.B.G. Thomas, thought our performance that day, it was the best Lions performance he'd seen. And that's when New Zealand woke up to the fact that, hey, these boys can do.
Look at this ball popping out.
When you supplement that Welsh side with all some wonderful players in it, with people like Willie John McBride, Slattery, behind them, the biggest one of all, obviously, was Mike Gibson. Of the players I played with, say Gareth, can you imagine Gareth on your inside and Mike Gibson on your outside? Well, you could have played with a duffel coat, I'd fly half, no problem, just give thanks Gareth, I Mike, all right.
There's no doubt in my mind that New Zealand forwards were superior to the British Lions forwards, and that our three quarters, I think, were far, far better than anything New Zealand had ever seen before.
Davis. Wonderful rugby.
People like Barry John and John Dawes, who was such a wonderful passer of the ball, Mike Gibson, J.P.R. Williams as full-back, John Bevan, Gerald Davis. Hey, you know, I'd play with those guys any time of day. They were quite outstanding.
Williams, Neil, Davis. Gerald Davis tying it ahead.
But going into the opening international, this outstanding side knew that history dictated if you lost the first test, you couldn't win the series.
I think the first match was the important thing. We were really struggling. We were just defending all the time.
I don't think we saw the ball for about 20 minutes. Just all these black figures running around the field, and we had to tackle them.
I remember Carwin saying, and I was leading the forwards, and I remember Carwin just saying, you know, all we need is the ball, and if we can get 40% of the ball, we'll win. And I remember I had this stuck in my mind, and every time we'd win it, I'd say, right, I hope we're achieving the 40%.
The performance of Barry John and how he placed the ball time and time again. And what was a windy, dirty day, within a metre or two of the touchline, and always Fergie McCormack, who was then hugely experienced all-black full-back, just caught it that metre short of the line and ran into touch. So we got the benefit of these huge kicks and then got the throw-in. I thought it was really an impeccable performance by Barry John that day.
We scored a rather fluky try, which put us in front, and then we hang on.
Number 8 for the try's done. Here could be a try. It's a try for the Lions.
The first test, I think we were exhausted just through defending.
Probing, looking for the gap, looking for support. He's got supporting.
It was one of those games I remember coming in the dressing room, and you know, you're elated that you won, and yet you're saying, but how did we win? The second test, we lost. We didn't play particularly well.
And they deserved to win, there's no doubt about that. It was a great thrill to play, great thrill, and I can remember most of the match, particularly Ian Kirkpatrick's try, which was one of the tries of the series, actually. I mean, it demonstrated what a great player he was. He had real pace. And a big man just ran off the base of a scrum with the ball, and about 3 or 4 of us tried to tackle him, and he just pushed us away.
The last part of that test, we were 22, I think 3 down or something like that. The game was lost. And then we started running the ball, what little ball we had. And I think we then realised that we could do something, you know, frighten them a little bit. And we carried that philosophy into the third test.
Carwin was very positive, coach, in saying that even though we lost that game, he was convinced that we could win the series. And we did change a few things. We brought Derek Quinnell onto the blind side to look after Sid Going, who was their main threat behind. And it was a dream start in the third test. We started off and we were 13 points up after 20 minutes.
Barry John and Gareth Edwards had a wonderful game that day, and they just took control of the whole game. Gerald Davis scored a superb try with next to no room to move, and that really knocked them for 6, and they just never recovered from that.
5 yards now from the all-black line. Can the Lions rush this ball? They can to Edwards. Edwards going. Davis is there. Gerald Davis has scored.
It was magic stuff. Magic stuff. We scored tries, we were on top, we dictated everything that happened. And the second half, you know, obviously they had a lifted game and we struggled to hold on, but we did. I remember coming in after the game, going back to the hotel and going to my room, and you know, we were elated at winning, and yet there was a sort of, so what?
We had a party of all party in Palmerston North on the Sunday, which lasted well until Monday morning. In fact, the training on Monday morning, I'll never forget, we turned up and Carwin just looked at the backs. So we used to split into backs and forwards. And he took one look at the backs and he said, oh, go away. He said, go away. By the time we got to the 4th test, it was a question of hanging on, because that was our 26th match on the tour.
Doug Smith, of course, our manager, had said before leaving the Shores, we will win the test series 2-1 and 1 drawn. He's either a clairvoyant or he's the luckiest man I've ever known.
And it was very tense on the way to the game, trying to cut the ice a bit. I said in front of everyone that I thought I was going to drop a goal that day, because I'm not renowned for dropping goals, and everyone burst out laughing.
It's 11 points all at the moment. Davis is there, Mervyn Davis to McLaughlin. McLaughlin, Gareth Edwards waiting for this one. Duckham flinging it out. John Williams, the full-back. And he did it.
Wonderful opportunism by J.P.R. Williams to drop that goal. He gave that clenched fist salute to the stand. And we all thought that was a bit of JPR gamesmanship, but what he was actually doing was signalling to Bob Hiller. Bob had said to him, you can only become a complete fullback if you drop a goal in a test match. And so JPR did that just to prove that he was the complete player, which he was anyway.
Your mind had been set from day one when we met at Eastbourne, right, from there to there, this is it. 4 months or whatever, like that, this is it. Bang! This is what your world's all about now. And once that, it's like the bell going on the final round. You're drained, absolutely drained.
So physically and emotionally draining that tour was. I was only referring to it the other day. It probably took me 9 months to a year to get over it. I found that I was talking to people in the streets and I didn't hear what they were saying.
And when we arrived back in London, of course, it was chaos. In fact, at Heathrow, after that, they had to relook at the security, I think, because some of the Welsh supporters were on the runway. They couldn't wait for it to get off the plane. I think they had these little table tennis bats going to the pilot, we're over here.
And 71, that's 1971, became the benchmark by which all future tours would be judged. Mind you, in those early days, ticker tape receptions at Heathrow were the last thing on anybody's mind. Heathrow itself didn't exist. A Lions tour was something of a misnomer. It was more an expedition.
It was 5 weeks out, 5 weeks back. We went out via Panama and back Suez. It was a wonderful experience. We all had to take £80, which we duly handed over to the manager. And when we wanted money, we asked him, could we have a penny from the kitty? And you weren't allowed to spend a penny, I met a New Zealander. And we all wore these, as they probably do now, the little lion badge. And that gave you entrance anywhere.
The Lions had been written off in advance, but only in the final test were they well beaten. New Zealand employed what they called a rover system, with 7 in the pack and the number 8 effectively an extra halfback. They also went to the dressing room at half-time for a cup of tea, leaving the Lions on the pitch. Post-match receptions were said to be frosty, and the All Blacks took the series 3-1.
But losing didn't upset us. We then were very much amateur in the way we played, it was fun. They played a much harder type of game. Not dirty, but hard. Whereas we were like little schoolboys until we got into the way of life. The New Zealanders were so happy with our coming that they'd lend you their women folk quite openly, and you'd have enjoyed it.
The 38 tour was a tale of 2 scrum halves. One, Hayden Tanner, the great Welshman who missed the test through injury, and the other, a man who led the Springboks to victory and who invented the dive pass and became one of the most influential figures in the whole history of the game, Darnie Craven. Mind you, perhaps the Lions didn't have their best party available. Selection was, to put it mildly, arbitrary.
They sent out invitations. Are you available? I think they had to ask 100 players or something. And when they got to 30, they got picked. I was going to give up my job to go, but I didn't have to. I went for 3-4 months without any pay, no pay at all. So I had to borrow 50 quid to go on the tour.
The Boks won the series 2-1 and led the final match 13-3 at half-time. When the final score of 21-16 came through via telex, none of the news agencies in Britain could believe the Lions had fought back to win, so the result was published as a Springbok success. Corrections and apologies were made later. It was to be the last Lions tour for 12 years.
Coming back at the end of the tour, when we got about halfway home, they suddenly got a thing that we had to go out into the Atlantic because the war scare on, you see. So we got an extra 2 days on the boat. Blair Main was one of our forwards, who was a great war hero afterwards. We got 4 DSOs, I think.
Every rugby tour needs a set of rules, if only so that everybody can then go and break them at some point. But in 1955, the Lions had a very specific code of conduct.
Lloyd's Law was about a player called
Trevor Lloyd from Maesteg in Wales, who was undoubtedly at least 37 years of age when he came on this tour. And nobody could quite understand. We had 3 scrum halves, Johnny Williams, Dickie Jeeps and himself. Nobody could quite understand how he'd got on. But there he was. And so we went to our first meeting, and we had Lord Chandos, or some great dignitary from the Commonwealth Office, tell us about going to South Africa, and we were arriving in South Africa, and should remember that the colonies were changing, and that politics were quite dangerous, and that we should recognize the fact that the new party of Strydom and Malan was in power in South Africa, and we had an enormous weight on our shoulders, etc. So there was silence at the end of this great peroration. And Jack Siggins, the manager, whom we called Mr. Siggins at this stage, said, would anyone like to ask any questions? And this incredible barnacled figure from the back stood up and he said, see here, Jack, he said, what I want to know, he said, is about Crumpet. So that was terrible sort of moment of truth. The rest of us, with our minds loftily concerned about the geopolitics of South Africa, and he wanted to know about Crumpet. So he wanted to know how would he be protected, like as he said, on the tour, if he saw somebody first, against the depredations of the other members of the side. So Jack Siggins showed a great moment of humour then. He said, well, I think that's a very good and very divisive potential point. He said, I think we'll have a law for the tour, he said, and the tour will be known as Lloyd's Law. If you see the person first, she's yours.
The 1950s were in many ways the romantic era of the Lions, playing for fun. In '59, they won a match in New Zealand for the first time since 1930. The 55 party faced the newly divided South Africa, and in 1950 they fielded arguably the finest three-quarter line in history: Rex Willis, Jackie Kyle, Jack Matthews, Ken Jones and Blethyn Williams.
We went there with a manager, Surgeon Commander Ginger Osborne, who was a superb guy, and we had as a secretary. No coach at all. So Carl Mullen was our captain and I was the vice captain. He looked after the forwards and I looked after the backs, and that was it. With no coaching, we just went out to enjoy ourselves. We went out specifically to entertain the people down there. We played a great deal of open rugby, but it became as a shock when we came across rucking for the first time. We'd never experienced it.
I think we could have won, should have won that test, yes, and I think New Zealand were very surprised that we would give them such a good game. It was a very good game. I think we lost in the last couple of seconds of the game. A lot of injuries, and of course you couldn't replace anybody in those days, and I don't think we finished with 15 men in about 20% of the games.
We were disappointed to a certain extent, but it wasn't the be-all and end-all. The important thing was to have travelled and to meet people, in the country, and that's what we did, and that's what we enjoyed.
We arrived in Johannesburg 9 hours late, the plane, and we'd had choir practice. I'd taken choir practice in Eastbourne, and had the boys singing with the piano, and English, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, and Afrikaans. And we got to the airport in Johannesburg, and we walked out, and there were thousands of people had waited 11 hours, waited to see the Lions, the first team since before the war, 1938. First team in 55 since the war. And they waited patiently. And I just said to the boys, listen, we can't just arrive and do this, we've got to sing. And we sang in English, Welsh, and we sang Me Sari Maree Se Ver Van Me Af. Sari Maree in Afrikaans, and the crowd went mad. They loved it. The next day in the Rand Daily Mail, it says, this is the greatest team ever to visit South Africa. We hadn't played a game.
105,000 people in the ground, and it was a bone-hard pitch. It was at 6,000 feet. It was at 90 degrees of heat.
And yet we played running rugby. The first try, for instance, was only touched by British Lions, wasn't touched by South Africa. Tony O'Reilly threw the ball in. Rhys Williams collected it, gave it to Dickie Jeeps. Dickie Jeeps flung a beautiful pass to me. And then I gave it to Phil Davies, the big centre, and he broke through, threw it behind Jeff Butterfield, who took it and brought it round and slid the ball to Pedler, who had nothing to do but get over in the corner. And that was right across the field from 40 yards out or something.
After approximately 10 minutes, Reg Higgins broke his leg, and so we had 14 men. We were 11-3 down. We were at 6,000 feet. There were 105,000 Afrikaners shouting for our blood. And we went from 11-3 down to 23-11 up.
Half-time, Butterfield has it. He dummies and puts in a brilliant run to score between the posts, a magnificent try.
Jeff Butterfield was the only person on our tour that thought about the game. I mean, he used to say, Moggs will turn him here with, we'll put the ball up in the air and you can push him back. He said, South Africans, he said, they can't think on the turn. And he was right, they couldn't think on the turn. And we ran them that way.
And O'Reilly following up, gathered and went for the line. O'Reilly, however, was brought down a matter of inches short, but his teammate Greenwood kicked forward and scored. This was converted, and another goal gave the Lions a lead of 23-11.
And then we ran out of puff, and they began to score. They got to 23-22, and Jack van der Scheef had the kick to save the match. It was going to be 24-23, and he came forward. The ground was bathed, complete silence. Took the kick, it just went slightly wide. We had won 23-22, and Jack van der Scheef went into South African history for all time as the man who missed the kick.
Among the crowd cheering for the Lions in the first test was one Nelson Mandela, and the tourists clearly could have won the series. They lost the second, 25-9, but won the third, 9-6. In the final match in Port Elizabeth, though, they finished well beaten, 22-8.
It was easier then, more fun for us, I mean, the boys did now enjoy themselves, I'm sure, on a tour. But there wasn't the fun of saying, let's hurry up and finish this training session this morning. And we go into a hospital at 11:30, or we go into a school to a morning assembly, everybody in the school, just to see 6 Lions. That is the whole thing about a Lions tour. When you give more of yourself.
Now in June 1959, New Zealand meets the Lions at Auckland's Whenuapai Airport. They're looking for fresh meat after a short but successful tour of Australia.
Now the crowd sees some of the play that's made O'Reilly's reputation. With terrific speed, the Irish wing three-quarter makes a bid for the New Zealand goal line, but just can't get there.
I do believe that we won the first test quite comprehensively. We scored 4 tries, 4 rather wonderful running tries.
O'Reilly has the ball. He's streaking away. He throws a one-hander to Scotland. They'll never stop now. Jackson has it. He beats McPhail. He beats Urban. Colton won't stop him, and he's scored in the corner.
And they kicked 6 penalties against us through the foot of the great Don Clark. So we lost 18-17. As the New Zealand ref said, I think I'd have given them another one if they needed it. So we always said that we'd been refed out of that particular game.
The results were close throughout the series, a 1-point margin in the first test, followed by a 3-point loss in the second. The Lions were 3-0 down when they came to the final match in Auckland, but all the attention by then was on whether Tony O'Reilly could break the Lions' all-time try-scoring record.
I had equalled Jones's record 4 matches earlier, but come what may, I could not score. So for the intervening 3 matches, I had not scored. And so to receive this try in the last test and to break Ken Jones's record was something I'll always remember.
The Lions are in a scoring position as the ball goes out to O'Reilly. He's over.
All rugby tourists, from the Lions downwards, delight in bringing back souvenirs from overseas trips. And in 1974, Bobby Windsor was no exception.
When we was in the Landrost Hotel in the last test, and they said, right, the world is your oyster, whatever you want is yours, and all this marvellous, love to see you, brilliant. And there was this cracking painting, the beauty I mean, I didn't have nothing possible. I like to have wallpaper on the walls in the house, I mind paintings. But I liked this, it was a crack, it was like a whole worldy thing. So I unscrewed it, I wrapped it up in, they give you sheets of brown paper, because all through the tour they let you send stuff home by sea. But I thought I'd wrap this up in brown paper now and I'll take it with me. And next day we went to the airport. And when we got there now, the manager of the hotel was there, I thought, oh bloody hell. And there's the liaison officer, Jute Visser. And he said, what you got there, Bob? I said, oh, it's one of the presents. He said, well, don't take it on the plane. He said, you'll get chucked in the old broke. Let me send it back for you in proper freight. No, I said, it's all right. So Silver was there. Bob, he said, oh, it's stupid. He said, let him send it back. And all right. He said, go on through. He said, I'll put the sticker on if you go on. So I went through. I never ever had that, Peter. And 2 years later, I went to play in Ireland, in Ballymena. And I went to Sid's house. And above Sid's fire, on the mantelpiece, was my painting. What he'd done, he'd give the bloke his name and address and had it sent to his house. I said, Sid, you bloody so-and-so. I told his wife, I said, I pinched that. And he pinched it off me. And she said, well, I tell you what, Bob, when he dies, I'll send it over. I said, that's fair enough.
By the 1960s, the harsh realities of overseas tours were hitting home. England may have been kings of the football world, but 2 victories over Australia aside, on 3 trips to South Africa and New Zealand, the Lions drew 2, but lost 10.
Out to Shaw, just outside the 25. He drops for goal.
It was very much closer than the scores done. I mean, we were in with a chance, most likely being the first Lions team to beat the Springboks.
The first test was a draw, and I think that probably decided the series. The second test, we lost 3-0. It doesn't seem a big score now, but a pushover try disallowed.
South Africans like New Zealanders are very clever. If there's anything controversial, they edit it out of the film that's on the movie news at the cinema the next week. We scored a perfectly good pushover try. Keith Rowlands actually was the guy who put the ball down, and yet they get up and it's disallowed.
And it was always said that the referee disallowed it because he didn't know which one of the Lions forwards had scored.
Lions tours had often been blighted by indifferent refereeing, but on this occasion, the knock-on effect was to boost the Springboks' morale, damage the Lions, and the series was lost 3-0.
And they remain unbeaten in 13 consecutive test matches.
The Lions arrived in New Zealand after an all-conquering trip to Australia, unbeaten in 8 matches, including 2 tests. Things were going to be rather tougher against the All Blacks, though, prompting tour manager Des O'Brien to go on holiday to Fiji midway through to escape the pressure.
The All Black power was just too much for us. They moved all over us. We had D.K. Jones in the centre, who's one of the best steppers in rugby football. He got tackled in the first 20 minutes, and he said it was like going through a tumble dryer when he came out the other end, because this was a rucking that we hadn't seen before in rugby football.
After that first test, the captain took the bravest decision of all, and in an unprecedented move, left himself out.
It was quite easy to do, and I think it's one's duty to do, especially if you know in yourself that perhaps you're not firing on all cylinders.
The second test match in New Zealand we should have won. We were only beaten by 16-12 or something. We played some very good rugby, and we were just beaten by the one try.
We didn't have neutral referees in those days, and PJ Murphy, the New Zealander, was appointed for all 4 test matches. We thought he'd been somewhat biased in one eye, to say the least, and we complained to the International Rugby Football Board. But needless to say, they gave the verdict saying, no, you've got him for 4 tests and that's it. The horse are New Zealand, and they've agreed that. And we thought we really dropped ourselves in it. Now, not only has he not looked after us as it is, we've now complained about him as well, asking him to be moved, and we thought we had no chance. And when we were sitting with mixed feelings in our dressing room at Christchurch, 50,000 out on the pitch there, all of a sudden the referee comes in the dressing room to us and sits amongst us and said, look lads, I'm not a biased referee. He said, as far as I'm concerned, may the best side win. I thought we cracked it because we've now got him on our side. He realises our frustrations as well. And the game kicked off. It was 3 minutes into the game, and a loose ruck formed, and then a scrum was called, and Roger Young, the Irish scrum half, picked it up. He said, whose ball, ref? And the ref says, ours. Who do you think it bloody is?
One of the things about the 66 tour and the 68 tour taught us that you can't be out-muscled against these big countries, and I think by 71 we'd learned, and certainly by 74, that the physical side of the game had to be overcome, and the forwards in particular had to get stronger and look after themselves a lot better on Lions tours.
By 68, the first signs of Welsh preeminence were apparent, and players like Barry John, having turned out for their clubs at the weekend, couldn't wait to get home to celebrate their selection for the most elite rugby side of them all.
In those days, I mean, we were all bussed anyway. We didn't have a fiver between us. And so by the time I arrived there, in this lovely little village that I was born and bred, they'd already started collections, you know, to make sure that our boy's not going out there and not a penny in his pocket. And eventually, by the time we left, and you must remember that I think a mini in those days was something like 720 quid. Well, they raised about 750 quid, you know, for me to go. They'd have a drink. Christ, must be a hell of a drink for 750 quid.
We got beaten 25-20 in that test. Tom Kiernan kept us in the game by kicking penalties. You know, Tom could kick them, and one day he'll miss everything, and another day he'll kick everything.
In the 3 previous games I had played, I think I had missed 18 kicks out of 21. And I got 6 out of 7, I think, in the test. And I think that's really good fortune, rather than anything else.
They lost the first test, but perhaps more significantly, lost Barry John to injury.
I felt that I'd found my stage, because they were running on top of the ground. You could really dart and bounce and sling and all the rest of it. And also with the kicking, 4,500 feet up, you only had to touch the ball and it would fly.
The second test we drew 6-all, I can well remember that. Then unfortunately from my point of view, I got injured and I didn't play in the last 2 tests.
The crucial one was Cape Town. We lost a match that could have gone either way. And of course finally in the last test, I think, and that's I think where the Lions are most vulnerable, with people, whatever they might say, thinking of going home. We were beaten by 20 points, I think.
They were stronger and better. It was the best pack I've ever played against in my life, and it was a bit of a lesson. And yeah, I was a bit dejected after, I must admit, because I knew we had been beaten up front by a much better side, especially in the front row, and frightening experience, really.
Bobby Windsor used to say he thought that 99 was a cornet with a chocolate in it.
The fist break out.
Get your retaliation in first had been Carwyn James' advice in 1971. 3 years later, the Lions agreed they might have to do some refereeing themselves.
I remember saying to the referee, you know, look, if you don't sort this out, we'll sort it out. And I'll never forget it, because he sort of shrugged his shoulders and let's get on with the game. And I thought, well, I'm not having this. And that's when I called the players in and I said, right, guys, when I call 99, we sort this out together, all of us. There were a few guys, there was 1 or 2 of them a bit hesitant. But, you know, we had no more trouble.
I think the opposition were more worried about the call 99 than what was actually going to happen to them.
JPR used to drive me nuts, because he'd love to come from full back and take me. If there was ever a skirmish or fight, he wanted to come for.
The third test, Willie John called it once. And Gareth Edwards and Phil Bennett and I were going that way, only to see JPR passing us at great knots going this way.
Yes, it's all rather embarrassing now, till 25 years later.
And if we called a line-out signal, and he was that a 99? No, John, it's okay, it's only a line-out.
I'm not sure whether it looked all that good to see me sprinting 40 yards from the back to punch one of the big Springbok forwards.
A giant free-for-all, fitting more for the boxing ring.
If 99 is the number that's passed into rugby folklore when recalling misty-eyed the events of 74, then before the party left for South Africa, 2 other numbers were of rather greater significance. 10, how could they replace the irreplaceable Barry John? And 71, how could they follow that?
Probably the biggest burden we had to carry was people's expectations. When we'd gone to New Zealand in 71, nobody expected you to win the series. Now it was, oh, well done, boys, go out to South Africa, give him another hiding, and, you know, you'll have done both. Well, it's not as easy as that.
Got bombarded by various people saying, oh, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't be going out there to mix with this, you know, illegal regime, as it were. And so there was a fair bit of pressure on us, and it was big news at the time.
Some said we're glad you came, others said we wish you hadn't. You know, but we went there purely for sport. We thought that we were doing something for them, for everybody, because they were our biggest supporters. The blacks or colours were always kept behind the posts in both games. And when we run onto the pitch, we always used to run to the back of the posts, because they were cheering us.
We had the nucleus of the 71 side, and that meant that we were starting ahead of anybody, including the South Africans, in the normal context. So that was a great boost to us.
Everybody talks about Willie John's first, the team meeting before that first test.
Willie John was just sat there puffing on his pipe, and not a word was said.
I remember they all sat and looked at me, and you would have heard a pin drop.
Willie would pick his words. Willie doesn't talk for the sake of talking.
And I thought,
I don't have to add anything to this. It's here. We're ready.
That was it, a couple of puffs of the pipe and we're off.
The first test in Cape Town was very wet, and I think it suited us more than that. There was one through kicks, but we won the forward contest easily. We didn't play any rugby because conditions didn't allow it.
Good heel for the Lions.
I honestly think that they thought they were better than they were, which was a misjudgment on their part. But the worst one of all was they misjudged us, the strength of British rugby. British rugby had gone on leaps and bounds in the early 70s, and they totally underestimated the strength of British rugby, particularly British forward play.
And Hannes Murray, the captain, who was the prop forward, he was amazed that how British rugby had improved in the scrimmaging from what he had seen in the 60s.
The Newlands crowd really tense. Are they going to witness a Lions victory for the first time here since 1938? Edwards looks for the long drop at goal. He struck it beautifully and it sails through. JPR Williams raises his arms in triumph.
By the time of the second test, the Springboks were under no illusions about just how good this Lions side was, and half the team was altered to try to redress the balance.
I remember speaking to each player individually before we went on the field. And you know, when you look a man in the eye, it tells you a lot. And I remember looking at each player straight in the eye. And I remember leading the team on the field, and it's a peculiar feeling, but it's a wonderful feeling to know there are 14 guys that they're just not going to lose, and they're going to give this everything they've got.
I think the second test was the turning point. We annihilated South Africa in that second test.
Rolling for JJ Williams into the 25. Williams kicks it on. This could be a try.
We were so in control up front that we were at last seeing some three-quarter play from the Lions, from the 74 Lions.
Brown at number 5, palming it, cleaned up by McBride. Edwards to Bennett, just in front of him, but it's still going to McGeechan. Chipping through, Bosch is underneath it. McGeechan hustles him off the ball. The referee says play on. McGeechan feeding it back. That's Dick Milliken, and the Lions pack take him with him. The ball comes loose. Phil Bennett switches blind. Bennett jinking his way through to Williams. It must be another try. The referee says no try. Against the head by Windsor with 5 men in the pack. Edwards to Bennett, the switch to Dick Milliken, straight down the middle. Dick Milliken looks which way to go. Fergus Slattery 5 yards short, can't quite make the line. Mervyn Davies. Ian McCallum chasing his own kick, chipping through again, the crowd roar. Phil Bennett in his own 25, running out of defence. Great turn of speed and the jink inside. Bennett to McBride, to Mervyn Davies, to McBride again, to Gordon Brown, Gareth Edwards, to Roger Utley, but Utley just knocking the ball forward, but the referee says play on. JJ Williams, where's he come from? Williams, a yard to go, and he scored! What an incredible try for the Lions. Comes back on the Lions side to Slattery. Slattery with men outside him, inside beautifully to Phil Bennett. Look at that acceleration. Bennett with Billy Steele, Bennett on his own. Bennett 5 yards short, he's going to score. Phil Bennett, what a solo effort. He fooled them all the way. He had men outside him, but he didn't need them. And finally he had that extra bit of pace to make the line. What a dramatic try for Phil Bennett. He'll never score better than that. Davies takes on Bayful. Mornay a long pass to Bosch. Bosch with Bennett at him. There's Bennett nailing his man, and Ian McCallum in desperation. Taken by Gareth Edwards. Edwards 5 yards short. Gordon Brown scoring again. The ball comes back again to the Lions. Dick Milliken. Milliken again. Milliken on his own, going for the line, 2 yards short. And
without question, it was a side full of ability. Players with real backbone, could stand up to anything. The physical demands, the emotional demands. A great leader in Willie John McBride.
As the Lions win 28 points to 9 and beat South Africa so completely.
We came on the field and then nothing happened, and you're thinking, well, you know, they've got to come out at some stage. And then the roar when this team, and they came flying down this tunnel, and you thought, game and a half on here. And for that half, it's the hardest rugby I've ever played in my life, that first 40 minutes, because they absolutely pounded us.
The third test was a very bruising challenge by South Africa. They played 9 forwards, a number 8 at scrum half, to really take us on, and they did. And but for a little mistake they made at half time, where the hooker threw the ball very graciously to Gordon Brown.
So suddenly we've had all this pressure and they've got nothing for it. We go in at half time, we're actually in the lead.
Palm by Brown, Edwards just eluding Ellis. McGeechan to Milliken, out to JJ Williams. Williams showing a good turn of speed, flicks it back inside to JPR, 5 yards short to JJ Williams again. He's going to score under the post. JJ Williams running out of defence, feeds Dick Milliken. He's got JJ Williams. JJ Williams chipping through, runs past Chris Pope. It's a race for the line. Will he get the bounce and the pick up? He's got it. The Lions carrying all before them. They win possession again. Edwards, the reverse pass to Bennett, waits for the drop goal and sails it over.
For me, that's perhaps one of the most emotional days of my life, because when we carried Willie John off, or the forwards carried Willie John, and went up the long tunnel to the dressing rooms of Port Elizabeth, sat down there with a can of beer, and it was that sort of hour in the dressing room was probably one of the great sort of hours of my life.
Paul Bayful, the scrum half. Oh, and it's a wild pass from Bayful, and the try given to the Lions.
I remember the final test because I scored the opening try in that match, in inverted commas, really, because I've got a picture of me horizontal and Chris Pope, their winger, has already touched the ball down. And of course that was the game where we drew the match, where Fergus reckoned that he actually got driven over the line and touched the ball down.
I remember everything about it. I mean, it broke from the right side of the field, came across to JPR, came in between the centres, and I was on his shoulder and was looking for the ball earlier than what I got, and I had actually had to slow down to take it again. And Peter Cronje was standing on the line more or less, and I just ploughed into him and knocked him back on his backside. After that, my lips were sealed.
If Utley's try wasn't a try, and if Slattery's try was, then maybe it was a fair result after all. But the history books will show forever that it spoilt the Lions' 100% record on tour, one that will surely never be repeated.
My ambitions as a youngster, my first ambition obviously was to play for Wales, and then to play for the British Lions, and then to beat New Zealand and South Africa in their own home yard. You can't ask for anything better than that.
That was the peak of British rugby. We'd won in 71 in New Zealand, now we'd won in South Africa. We'd been to the two great countries and we'd beaten them. And I felt, and it was a lovely thing, not for Welsh rugby, English, Scottish, Irish rugby, it was British rugby.
There's a sort of brotherhood in rugby football. And there's a bond. And the bond certainly of 74 will never be broken until we die, and we might even meet up there.
One of the most remarkable aspects of the tour was the Lions' defence. In 4 tests, the Springboks scored just a single try against them, and in midweek games their goal line was virtually unbreachable. But there was one opposition score of special significance.
We played a side called the Leopards, all black side, at a black stadium. Now the Springboks hadn't scored a try against us, and we were winning something like 60 points against this side, and they scored a try. Well, they come on the field and they got this bloke and just carried him off. Never come back on, and we seen this chief after. He had a leopard on a chain. He said, well, we crossed the line before the whites did, the South African, the blacks did, you know what I mean? We crossed your line first. This was a great thing, brilliant. But also, see, we were the first white side to play against the black side, on the same ground, go to a dinner in the night with them, back to their village after, which was hard work.
When you've reached the top of the rugby mountain, there's only one way to go. Poor selection, dreadful weather, and a gruelling itinerary. The Lions travelled more than 40,000 miles, involving more than 70 takeoffs and landings, and endless coaches and train journeys, eventually took their toll in 1977.
We took on the attitude in Britain then, like we do with other sports, that we only had to turn up in New Zealand or turn up in South Africa, and we would win. And it was an attitude which perhaps we shared ourselves, to be honest with you. We thought that, 71 Lions did it and 74 Lions do it, but let's go out and give it a good shot and we'll be all right.
1977, I felt going out there that we were as good a side as 74. The biggest disappointment that JPR and Gareth Edwards didn't come. And they realised it. The JPR's told me a number of times it was a big mistake that him not come. If he had come, and Gareth, I think we would have won that series.
When I look back, in all honesty, and perhaps not many people know this, that I'd had serious doubts about going on the Lions tour because I just had my first little baby boy had been born, and I worshipped the little boy.
We lost the concentration, and I think a lot of the boys were homesick out there. Our captain, Phil Bennett, was very homesick, and possibly he shouldn't have been picked captain. It took his flair away from him, and I would like to have seen someone like Ian McLaughlin going on that tour and be made captain. We had lost the first test in Wellington. We made a lot of mistakes that allowed the All Blacks to win that game.
We played into the wind and we weren't down by many points at that, and I thought we were going to win this. And I can always remember that we moved the ball out of defence and we're coming up to the halfway line, and I think we had 4-1 an overlap, and all of a sudden Grant Batty sneaks in, gets the ball, runs 50 metres underneath the post, and they've won the first test. And that was the turning point of the whole tour for me.
If it hadn't have been an intercept by Batty, it must have been a try to the Lions.
After match functions, we tended to go in a corner. It's almost the environment and everything. We became too insular, ultimately, to sort of be a popular side in New Zealand. It was a good experience for me because I realised, just how much you've got to get right all the time on the tour, not just from your own point of view, but from the perception of how others see you.
No Lions side had won second test in Christchurch. I remember Fran Cotton saying to me as we stepped into the corridor to run onto the field, turned to me, he said, let's go out and make history. And I remember saying to him in the bar that night, what did you mean by that? He said, because no side had ever won in Christchurch to level the series 1-1.
JJ scored a cracking try. I was outside him and he should have passed.
Gordon Brown outside the 22. Quinnell, McGeechan, JJ Williams. What a score!
But that was a tough test. That was very, very physical.
It was a changing point in New Zealand rugby, in the history of New Zealand rugby, because they realised that they weren't going to win these forward battles any longer, that they're going to have to change their style. That's exactly what they did. They dropped Sid Goin, who was the king of New Zealand rugby. They wanted a different style, and they caught us a bit unprepared.
Free to Lynn Davis, away to Doug Bruce, running. Bruce Robertson, Brian Ford. Bircher made the tackle, look at Ford.
I think the pack in 77 were stronger than either maybe the 74 or the 71 pack. But the conditions were such that our back play didn't flourish.
I think we were so carried away with our forward dominance in the scrummage. The All Blacks, I think, outthought us because they didn't really mind us winning the scrummage because their back row just disengaged so quickly. In fact, one of the reasons that we won the scrummage was because they didn't have a back row. They laid off. And I felt sorry for Phil Bennett because he was criticised a lot for not being able to, make the breaks.
I wasn't physically and mentally strong enough for that type of long period away from home. I think sometimes you have to be like Willie John, strong, big man, know what you have to do. And really, I found it quite difficult as captain. You have your own room as Lions captain. It can be great to have the peace and quiet, and it can also be a very lonely place. And there were times on that tour where I thought, God, I'd love to be back home in Llanelli on a lovely summer's day, having a pint of beer with my wife in a nice garden with my little boy there and enjoying it. Instead of that, we were in New Zealand in their wettest winter, I think, for about 40 odd years.
We had to train in the rain, and every time we went training, we were coming off the training paddock muddy, soaking wet. And this was every day. You have to tramp back, take dirty kit off, put it in the laundry. And that went on for another long tour, 77. And I think it was that in the end that wore us out.
But despite all their problems, the Lions could still have drawn the series with a win in the final test.
Still Beaumont, infield to Graham Price, Steve Fenwick, 5 metres out. Doug Morgan!
In the fourth test, we had them, and we should have won it with one slip up at the last minute of that fourth test.
Phil Bennett.
Minutes to go, I just kick the ball downfield to play no sort of no thrills rugby, don't make mistakes. They put a Gario in anywhere, somebody drops the ball and they go over the line, and all of a sudden you think that's been the story of the tour.
What a try by Laurie Knight! And that one could clinch the series!
I know that 77 Lions tour should have beaten the All Blacks in their own patch. The sense of underachieving will live with me to the day I go to the grave.
All work and no play, the Lions of old certainly knew how to enjoy themselves. Bill McKay was a rugged ex-Irish international who went to live in New Zealand, and his hospitality was legend.
I met him in 1971. He was a very tough, hard, uncompromising guy, and he said, do you want to come out hunting the following day? And he managed to hustle Ian McLaughlin, and we went out hunting, picked us up at 5:30 in the morning in the middle of winter, Range Rovers across rivers that were maybe up to a quarter of a mile to half a mile wide, tops of mountains, onto horseback to get to the very tops of the mountains, and then you went hunting pig and boar and all the rest, and rifles and packs of dogs and all the rest. And Ian McLaughlin had just said, look, I'm out. And he sat on top of this mountain for the day, and I mixed in with the Maoris and the guys, and we went hunting and came back like 6 hours later, and having stuck a couple of boar, one which I had to climb right back up to the top of the mountain, picked on my back. And the celebrations that night back on one of the stations, Ian was caught outside in the backyard shooting a possum that was about that much away from the top of the rifle that he had in his hand. So that really was, you know, the all-conquering lion. And then, of course, he had the audacity to appear on the front page of the New Zealand Herald, the chef's equipment on, with the boar that I killed, with him standing over it with a big knife. I thought, whoa, what, even for a Scotsman.
But in the 1980s, as the fire went out of the Dragon, so the roar went out of the Lions.
Over the head of Slammer, the cross comes Ward.
The 1980s began in South Africa, again hugely controversial. As the Moscow Olympics suffered a mass boycott, so there was furore at the home nation sending another party to the pariah of international rugby. That, together with a host of injuries, made it one of the Lions' least successful tours.
The saddest thing was we did have a phenomenal pack of forwards. You know, we went to South Africa and these guys took them to pieces, and we ended up with a fairly inexperienced back division.
The Lions quackery group to try and hold them off, but it's from low.
It's a bit like the Five Nations. When you lose the first test, it takes a hell of a lot to get back. You know, you want to win that first game, and that was a big loss for us in Cape Town.
The Lions, led by Bill Beaumont, only just lost the second test, the first in which a neutral referee was used. And a similar result in the third meant the 17-13 triumph to round off the tour was little more than a consolation.
The fourth test is the one that we really should have been hammered, because by that time we did have a lot of injuries, and the players are really just thinking of getting on the plane and getting home.
Ollie Campbell in support. Lovely dummy from Campbell, the chance now surely. Racing to the line is O'Driscoll, can he make it? He's brought down a metre short.
I think Andy Irving coming out gave us a big boost. He couldn't start the tour because injured. So playing with him was great, because he was one of the genuine, what I call superstars.
Short. Irving now rolling over.
Just that little bit different. We had a little bit luck and it went our way.
Ravel.
And arguably, I think we probably played better in the second and third tests, which we lost, and yet we won the fourth test.
Probably a draw would have been a fair, 2 each would have been a fair result of that tour.
Well, a popular captain who's deserved this great consolation at the end of the tour.
And this is Lancaster Park, where 50,000 people have come from far and wide just to be able to say they were there when New Zealand met the British Isles to kick off the 1983 4-test series.
1983 was in many ways 1966 revisited. The central issue was whether the captain was up to the job, and the results were equally disappointing. The Lions lost the series 4-0, another blackwash.
I think there was intense speculation from the journalists, not alone on the trip, but in yours truly, as why Kieran Fitzgerald should be captain. And I think they set about trying to find out everything about me out there that would prove that I shouldn't have been captain of the tour.
Kieran Fitzgerald had proved himself as a leader and captain of the championship side, and yet everybody got at him. They said, oh, he can't throw in straight. And of course, everybody looked, oh, that's crooked, that's crooked. And they started building up this anti-feeling. I had seen another side of media that was, well, I didn't like. You know, they were destructive rather than constructive.
The 83 was just an unmitigated disaster from start to finish, really, and the selection was totally wrong. I was surprised I was selected. I was probably picked more on reputation.
Physically, it was a challenge, both from elements and from the dreaded Blacks, and they were at their height, really, in 83, very strong and powerful in their own backyard. The first game was the acid test, and we just failed, and we only just failed. It was a very tight match with a tight scoreline, and from there, I'm afraid we let ourselves down as much as falling to a very good side.
The tour went from bad to worse, even though the Lions scored some outstanding tries.
Replacement locked forward, nudged again, Baird chasing! Oh, let's have a look at the referee's decision. Out to the Lions, Campbell. Oh, good one for Baird, it's the 22-metre line. Roger Baird. Oh, Wilson went after and got him beautifully. Gwyn Evans, though. Rutherford.
By the fourth test, many of the party were looking to go home.
And it was very difficult at the last one, I think, in Auckland, because it was the last match before going home, and you know, having come 3 down, it was always going to be difficult in the last test.
Oh, it's down on the ground. Wilson will get another try.
In 1974, Phil Bennett suffered a bad leg injury during the second test match, but Willie John McBride promised he'd look after him when the Lions went in search of some real wildlife at the Kruger National Park.
We went there after winning the second test to sort of celebrate and get a few days in before we had a game on the Thursday. And Willie had said to me, I look after you for staying on the field and all this, that, and the other. And it was, oh God, on the Sunday was the biggest drinking session. So I stuck with Willie.
And it got a bit messy. Late at night, probably morning.
There was Billy Steele flat out on the floor, the Scottish winger, and I don't think Billy played much rugby after that. Mouse was drinking, there was beer, there was one hell of a state.
I said, come on, Phil, I think we should get out of here. And I got Phil on my back and I'm carrying him.
Because I couldn't walk, stitches on my knee. And we were looking for our hut, or my hut, and he was going through numbers.
It's 97 and 92 and 93, and we couldn't. And we're walking in the darkness.
What number are you? And all of a sudden,
this lion roared.
And Willie went off in a canter.
It frightened the life out of me, and I ran.
And I was on his shoulders, and a branch came across him.
And
cracked me across the head.
Knocked him off my back, and he is lying in the back in the dark.